Hello, everyone. My name is Cam Cashman.
And my name is Ron Cashman, and welcome to Worlds Beyond with Cam and Ron.
So, what are we doing here? Well, my uncle and I talk a lot about what we like to consider pop culture. Sometimes I don't know how popular it actually is, but I like to think sometimes we're ahead of the curve with a lot of things. We've been watching the Marvel movies since they came out, and I think we've seen everyone in the theater. We also love to discuss horror and sci-fi films, both new and classic, and just anything from UFOs to the paranormal to kaiju and everything in between. And we thought, what better way to share our discussions with the people who love the stuff as much as we do than present it in a podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. Obviously, we like a lot of the same things and have a lot of the same interests, but we don't always like the same things about the things that we like. And we definitely don't always agree. The other thing I think we bring to this is a generational perspective. Obviously, with you just having graduated college in the past year and me being the crusty older guy, I think we, again, have that sort of old school, new school perspective that we bring to things.
Yeah, absolutely. And beyond that too, you are an aspiring writer working on a novel, and I am a writer as well, but I was a film major in college, and so I have kind of a technical background in filmmaking that I bring to our discussions. So our plan here really is to cover a couple topics briefly on each episode and kind of start short. We don't want to overstay our welcome, especially as we continue to have technical difficulties and issues with our recording software and microphones, but we seem to have everything at a at least usable place now. So we're gonna put out a few episodes. Please excuse any kind of technical issues we had, especially recording quality issues in the first episode. But hopefully, we'll delve deeper into our subjects as we go, and our technology and podcasting skills will improve as we go along. So bear with us.
Yeah, definitely. And so that is our master plan.
And we really hope you enjoy it.
For our first two-part episode, we are going to be covering Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, as well as the first 5 episodes of Marvel's What If on Disney+. So, Shang-Chi has been out for a month already. It has broken a record. It's the first post-pandemic film to gross over $200 million, which is quite an accomplishment. Cam and I actually saw the movie its opening weekend at my local Regal cinema here in Plymouth, Mass. And we saw it on the nice big RPX screen, which was tremendous. And so, Cam, I'll ask you, what is your initial reaction?
Yeah, well, I mean, I enjoyed the movie, but I have to kind of start out going back to you were just talking about how we saw it at a Regal RPX theater, which is where we usually see our films. However, this time was a little bit different. We saw it in the middle of the day at a 2 o'clock matinee showing, and I personally think that had a pretty big effect on just our attitudes going into it. You're right. Smaller crowd and less enthusiastic crowd for sure. I mean, and not that that theater gets a ton of people anyway, although it was pretty packed for Black Widow when we saw it, and that was a Friday night. But normally we go out to dinner beforehand and we have a chance to kind of hang out and talk about our expectations. Whereas this time around we were a little bit late getting to it, so we decided to go to a 2 p.m. afternoon showing. And I think that really just had a effect on our energy levels and our enthusiasm, because I know I just wasn't feeling as excited as I usually am, and I don't think it had anything to do with the movie, because I did enjoy it, but I think it would be best to see it again before I can really say anything solid about my feelings, only because I feel like we were not really in the right, or at least maybe not the right mindset, but in our usual kind of excited for Marvel. We just had dinner at some great restaurant, and sitting down to watch a Marvel movie on a Friday night is very different from seeing it on Saturday at 2.
Yeah, I think that probably had some impact. Like you were saying, though, overall, I enjoyed the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it was a huge impact, maybe a little bit. Overall, my reaction was solid entry in the MCU. I was really had, to me, felt different with the martial arts action and just the way they introduced the characters and the sort of that like Asian family dynamic in San Francisco was really cool and
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I enjoyed the movie. I felt like this one was a little bit of a tale of two movies for me overall. I loved the first half. The second half I felt was a little bit of a letdown, although I enjoyed it. That's my overall initial reaction.
I agree. I mean, I think overall this movie was just like so solidly made across the board. A couple of standout things for me at least were the fight scenes and the cinematography,
Absolutely,
the fight choreography.
outstanding.
Obviously, yeah, outstanding. Everyone's saying that. That's not a huge revelation, but I agree. I think around the time, and we will be getting into spoilers, I think around when Trevor Slattery appeared, as much as I loved his inclusion in the callback to Iron Man 3, and we finally get to see everything that's been going on with him, I think just around that time in the movie is when it started to kind of lose steam. And then, especially towards the end, when they started introducing so many different monsters and creatures and objectives that they had to do, and it just seemed like it was bouncing a lot and jumping around from, oh, first, Wenwu, Shang-Chi's father, is the villain, and then they have a battle, but then that battle ends and it moves into a bigger battle with the dragon creature, and it just felt like a lot was going on. But everything leading up to it was great, and I think they did especially a great job fleshing out the villain and his relationship with the hero, and it was a little bit different from a normal Marvel movie where the villain is usually some sort of kind of clone of the hero in some way, or like especially if you think about Black Panther where it's just another Black Panther suit guy, or all the Iron Man movies where it's usually another iron thing. And this one felt a little bit different because the main conflict was less the punching the bad guys and more with the family dynamic and father son relationship. So I think that was a big step in the right direction in terms of plot and character development for the MCU.
I agree. I think one of the things I enjoyed, again, as it moved from the first act into the second act, was the a little bit of the misdirection. It was like, okay, the the dad is the big villain, and then it was like, okay, well, no, maybe the dad's not necessarily the villain. There's we don't know what's happening with this mysterious place that his mom came from, and maybe there's a villain there. And so that misdirect, I think, both helped and muddied the waters a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It made it a little bit made it more interesting in terms of not being again that the typical villain, which you mentioned is sort of like sometimes a mirror image of the protagonist. But it also was like, okay, it's the dad, and then okay, no, it's this mysterious demon creature that inhabits this other dimension, and it's
Mm-hmm.
coming to hack into our dimension. And then we had that little Shang-Chi's family, his mom's family, facing off against the dad's family and his minions. And then that was kind of like I was gearing up for that whole conflict,
Right.
and then all of a sudden it becomes this like kaiju battle with like
Right, with dragons
the
and
Great Protector,
Mhm.
Water Dragon, and then that Cthulhu type, demon creature in the end. So that all was good, and it was good in terms of like having sort of multiple layers to the antagonist in the film, but it also kind of was like, okay, where are we going here?
Again, like to a lesser extent, Loki, and then WandaVision, and Falcon and Winter Soldier, and Black Widow to a certain extent as well, have all shown just significant sort of steps in the right direction in terms of addressing complaints that people have with the MCU, like common complaints.
Like what?
A lot of people will complain about the cinematography and particularly the color grading of Marvel's films. A lot of people say that they really wash out a lot of the colors and that the cinematography is very focused on like shaky cam and not really focusing on the action and quick cuts to mask kind of less than stellar fight choreography. And the villain aspect as well, we were talking about a little bit earlier. Like a lot of people say that Marvel's villains aren't the strongest, and so I think those previously mentioned Phase 4 properties or entries each address kind of a different thing, and I think here we really see an emphasis on the development of the villain and the side characters around the main character. Like we got a lot of Aquafina's characters. What was her name? Katie. We got a lot of her background, and she had kind of a bit of an arc going on, and then also obviously her relationship with Shang-Chi was a little bit non-traditional. Obviously, she wasn't the kind of romantic interest that you might see in a typical blockbuster film. Marvel's been pretty good about cliched romantic interests, but occasionally they fall into that trap. But overall, I think we just saw a huge improvement with the quality of the cinematography, especially when it comes to the fight scenes. Everything was very steady, and there was a lot of longer takes as opposed to quick flashing cuts. Then obviously this one seemed to really emphasize the colors, especially at the beginning when Wu is meeting Shang-Chi's mother for the first time, and they have that little dance battle thing. That was very colorful. And then the other standout scene for me was when Wenwu goes and kills the people in the restaurant there, the Ten Rings, and they kind of show everything that's going on in the reflection of the wall, which I thought was really cool. And I saw a tweet too the other day. I forget who said it, but it was something along the lines of like, people who complain about Marvel movies are always going to complain about the same things, but if you really like sit down and look at the cinematography and everything, you can see that they have really made an effort, at least in this case.
I agree, and I think in particular to me in Widow and Shang-Chi, the fight scenes have been outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, especially Shang-Chi, just because of the martial arts. I think to those complaints, when you're doing a one-off movie, some sort of like stylized action movie, you can zero in. Like that's really the selling point, and that's really the only selling point. But like the John Wick movies, and people are like, oh man, the John Wick movies and just the way they did, choreograph the action scenes was wow.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the whole movie.
Right.
And they set out to achieve that, and they knock it out of the park. Whereas I think with Marvel films have so much more, to probably in some people's eyes their detriment, because a lot of people complain that every blockbuster sort of franchise universe type movie that you're always just setting up the next movie. But
right.
So that's the negative part of it, perhaps. But the positive part of it, or what I would say in those movies' defense, is that for a Marvel movie, it's not just about the cinematography or just about the fight scene. There's so much more that these movies have to achieve and get across to continue the larger story.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally.
And I think there probably was a feeling, because this character is not as well known.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to this, wasn't a major Marvel character.
Mm-hmm.
He had his run in the 70s and 80s, so they probably felt the need to do more.
Right.
I love the way the movie ended, with the connectivity to the larger MCU narrative going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I like to love every Marvel movie. There hasn't been one that I've disliked yet. That is what it is. Some might say that, oh well, you love all these movies, so you're not very objective.
Right.
But I think among Marvel fans and MCU fans and just superhero movie fans and sci-fi pop culture fans, there's probably not a lot of us that haven't, unless we have a bone to pick with Marvel, or a bone to pick with Marvel versus DC, or superhero movies in general. Unless you have one of those bones to pick, you probably have liked all these movies, and it's just a matter of scale. So this isn't going to be in my top tier. It'll probably be in my second, maybe the bottom of my second or third tier in the context of whatever it is, whatever we're up to now, 28 movies that I've really, really enjoyed.
I think there was a lot of pressure on Shang-Chi to be really good, because it was almost that movie. Now that Infinity War is over, I think there's been this kind of like honestly like cynical switch that has flipped on with people, and now everyone is like, it's the cool thing to be skeptical about Marvel and say this is the one that's gonna destroy it. And then so Shang-Chi was the one everyone was saying was like, oh, Shang-Chi, who is that? I've never even heard of him. Why should I be interested in it? Oh, Marvel's done it this time. Which of course Kevin Feige always proves those people wrong. But to me, I don't buy into that kind of criticism of people saying like, oh, I've never heard of Shang-Chi, so obviously this movie's going to be bad. If anything, me not knowing a character like Shang-Chi, and obviously Eternals coming up as the next one that everyone's kind of saying the same thing about, that to me makes it more interesting because there's more potential for me to go in completely blind and come out happy as opposed to going in with expectations of a character that I'm familiar with. And a lot like we've talked about, obviously there hasn't been a Marvel movie that we've disliked yet, but when you go in with expectations about a character that you're familiar with, you're more bound to be like let down by certain depictions. Whereas where with Shang-Chi and Eternals and a couple of other characters that we're going to be seeing introduced into the MCU are all kind of newer characters or less popular characters. And to me, that is kind of the opposite of what a lot of people say. That's just more potential for new and interesting ideas. So I think alongside that, and the fact that a lot of people complain about character relationships and villains being weak, I think they really kind of went out of their way to spend more time fleshing out that kind of stuff.
So overall,
Yeah, definitely positive. I definitely am going to need to see it again, and I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy it probably a lot more the second time. Not to say I didn't enjoy it this time, but I think that is when I can really solidify my kind of view on it as a part of the MCU. Now we're going to move on into the first 5 episodes of Marvel's What If.
my initial reactions to, and this would I think apply to the first couple of episodes. It took me a while to get into what they were doing, and I'm obviously familiar with the What If comics, and although it's been years since I've read one, and getting into this whole idea, they were really sort of replaying the actual arcs from various movies with the what if spin on it. I thought they were just going to be more random stories. I didn't know that they were going to be sort of again replaying a specific arc. So that part of it was like, okay, I feel like I'm just watching the plot of the first Cap movie, and they're just sort of switching it around. Then as it went on, it got, I was kind of like, okay, this is kind of fun. I can get into it. Obviously, she was kicking ass, having Steve come in with the Stark tech there. And then for me, by the end, when they had like the Lovecraftian monsters start to come out of the Tesseract and everything else, right, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And it's just kind of like, okay, we're going to replay the arc of each film, not of each film, of a film in each one of these, and then sort of spin it. And so I would say, jumping just outside of the first episode for a moment, I think I've appreciated the ones that feel less like they're a straight recast of a plot arc, and the one more than the ones that sort of follow the plot arc more specifically. I've enjoyed those more.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much feel the same way. I mean, I felt episode 1 was kind of just a retread of the first Avenger, but just swapped a little bit. But then, obviously, towards the end, it got really cool. And then, but I think that was it was clearly a choice on their part to start out with probably one of the more traditional stories where it doesn't deviate too far from the structure of the film itself, but just switches around characters and roles and that sort of thing.
Right. And I think it's almost like I can understand it more now from a MCU audience standpoint. It probably made more sense to say, okay, you remember this movie and you remember what happened. What if this happened? I think that made it make more sense to an audience that's primarily familiar with the MCU and less the comic books and sort of the history of Marvel.
Right.
I guess in that lens, it made more sense to do it that way.
And then episode 2 is kind of the exact opposite of the first one, where it's kind of way out there and way different from what happened. I mean, obviously they kind of mirrored some scenes, but I liked that episode because the what if was more or less like, what if Star-Lord was not an idiot. And like T'Challa is smart and knows how to negotiate and charming and everything else, whereas at least in the first Guardians of the Galaxy, Star-Lord was kind of a moron.
Totally flying by the seat of his pants.
Right,
Yeah.
and I thought it was really funny to see just how different everything turned out just with that one kind of competence swap there, even like moving past the character swap, but just the fact that T'Challa is so much more competent than Star-Lord is. It's like Thanos is good and the Ravagers are working together, and so I thought that was a really clever way of doing that. But I think that it almost, as much as I loved that episode, it was very well written and everything, and almost felt like too separate from the MCU, whereas the first stuck too closely to the situations of the original. But I think they've really struck a balance.
Similar to episode 1, the first like 10 minutes or so, I was kind of like, okay. And then I laughed out loud when Thanos showed up.
Oh yeah.
I was like, oh my god, they're really like, and that's sort of when the episode opened up to me, and like just the way Nebula's character was, and I loved the way it was sort of like the double fake out with Nebula,
right?
Like she was good and then she was double crossing them, but then oh no, she really wasn't double crossing them. I loved that. So just by the end of the episode, I was laughing. I was just really getting into the whole way they pulled it together. It was really nice the way they tied it up. I didn't even pick up on the point that you made about how just the difference in personality between Star-Lord and T'Challa. And how that played into how they acted as Ravagers. But in contrast, I would say exactly. Episode 1 stuck really close. Episode 2 was way more far out. I actually like it better. And again, it just goes back to that whole idea. Like, I didn't realize that they were trying to replay plot elements from the movie with a what if spin on them. So I actually like the ones that stray further away from the MCU plot points. But so episode 3 was a murder mystery a bit. I loved it because I was really excited to have sort of a lot of the traditional Avengers. I loved obviously seeing Tony. Loved seeing Widow and Fury together in that sort of, and you got a little bit of a glimpse into their relationship sort of pre their introduction in the MCU, and how that relationship was coming together. And contrary to a lot of other people, I love Iron Man 2 because it introduces just a lot of that arc with Fury and Natasha, who's arguably my favorite MCU character, probably is my favorite MCU character. So that was a great twist. It got really kind of crazy towards the end, and then I thought it was interesting how they replayed a variety of different scenes, like the donut shop scene with Tony, Widow, and Fury, like the library crosswalk thing between the buildings with the Hulk.
Incredible Hulk, with Mark Ruffalo instead of Ed Norton, which was interesting.
Exactly, yeah, that was cool. So like I like that they peppered it, so they were they're replaying scenes from the films, but there were so many different ones put together in such a really interesting way that I really enjoyed that. And of course, the whole twist with Hank Pym being the perp at the end, I thought was kind of really kind of crazy and out there. And that starts to bring into my mind one of the things that I guess I would say is a little bit of a theme that I've noticed that I'm not sure I love. You didn't notice it so much in the first 2 episodes because they both, I guess, I would sort of say have happy endings. But this comes up more in 3, 4, and 5, as well as like it's kind of a really dark twist. At the end, we've got how many Avengers die in episode 3, and Hank Pym is this raving lunatic. I don't remember the sort of trail end. I know there was probably sort of a little bit of a hopeful spin right at the very end, as they've done in a couple of the others. But I was like, this gets really dark.
Episode 3, I think, like you were saying, it was almost a combination of the first two episodes where it both combined familiar scenes and
Hmm.
redid them, but also kind of went in a completely different direction as well. And I really like what they did with the murder mystery. I had no idea who was doing the killing the Avengers at first, but then
Hmm.
obviously as soon as they said Hope, and I thought
Right.
about everything that had happened and the methods of each murder, and I knew immediately that was going to be. Uh, well, I guess I thought it was Ant-Man. I guess
Hmm.
technically it was Yellow Jacket, but it was Hank Pym
Hmm.
as Yellow Jacket.
Yeah.
Um, but and yeah, it was kind of a dark ending, especially making Hank Pym a lunatic. But I almost see that as a reference to the comics because he isn't the most mentally stable in the comics either. And I think,
Oh, really?
yeah, no,
Okay.
I think he is known for being kind of abusive to
Hmm.
Janet in the comics, at least in some of the
Oh,
older
wow.
stuff. But I mean, there's so many comics that his personality has really changed. But like, he's always been a little bit kind of a goofball in the comics, and he's actually more put together in in the MCU than he is in the comics.
Hmm.
And so I think I saw that a little bit come out. But then in terms of just the overall tone, I think I'm not super familiar with the original What If comics, but I think a lot of them tend to have darker endings and depressing endings.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. I think
that's
you're right now that I remember back, because I think in some ways now that you mention that, that brings to mind something. I wasn't as deep. I kind of piggybacked on your dad's love of Marvel,
mm-hmm,
and sort of like sucked in all the mythology of it, from him being such an avid collector when he was a kid, and me being a bit younger than him, just sort of following it. But what I
right,
remember about what if concept is, it almost reminded me a little bit of like, the famous sort of 50s horror comics,
mm-hmm,
it had sort of in horror and sci-fi comics, it sort of had a little bit of that vibe to it.
right,
So
yeah.
yeah, I think you're onto
Yeah, because
something
those always had kind of those did not necessarily downer ending, but one of those endings that either well, yeah, sometimes downer endings that make you kind of think and sit for a second and be like, damn, like that's really dark kind of stuff.
there. Or that almost like sort of Twilight Zone,
Right,
Outer
right, yeah,
Limits
yeah, where the
sort of
hero doesn't
ironic
necessarily
twist kind of
make
thing.
it, yeah, make it out the same. But yeah, leading in to episode 4, obviously that was I think the darkest so far, at least in terms of the first 5 episodes, because it just ends with Doctor Strange sobbing in a void, and that's it. And I know you weren't as big of a fan of it, but I think I have to agree with a lot of people online and saying that's probably the best one. And I think the ending really has a lot to do with it, why I like it so much, just because it's just so different from anything that we've seen in the MCU where everything always has mostly a good ending, or if not a good ending, it all ends up working out one way or another, whereas that really didn't. And I just liked the whole replaying of the Doctor Strange story, but with a different motivation, and the visuals, especially in Episode 4, were
Mm.
crazy. The him battling himself and him
Hmm.
sucking up the soul energy or whatever from all the different creatures across the
Hmm.
multiverse, which was really funny. Um, yeah, no, I think that episode is probably my favorite just because of how different it is.
Yeah, so episode 4 for me it's probably my least favorite.
Huh.
Maybe we can do a quick ranking at the end, but probably my least favorite. I think, well, here, so I'll start with what I appreciated about it. Yeah, the visuals were crazy, cool, reminiscent of the actual Doctor Strange film visuals.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there was sort of a little bit of a Lovecraftian theme flowing through that
Right.
with some of the other dimensional beings and things like that, and so I love that always. Um, and I think maybe, to me, I feel like what a lot of people have reacted to online and stuff is, it clearly has a big tie into a lot of the multiverse stuff that's happened
Definitely.
in
Yeah.
Loki, that's going to be happening in No Way Home, in Multiverse of Madness, and carrying on from
WandaVision. So I think to me, I feel like a lot of people are like, oh yes, yeah, this is going to tie into all the multiverse stuff, and so I feel like some people were reacting to that. I went back and thought about it. Why did I have such a meh reaction to this episode
Mm-hmm.
compared to others? I think I am somebody who, in typically an ongoing TV series, I can't. I don't want to say hate. It's too strong a word, but I typically never like the Groundhog Day
Right,
episodes,
right,
the inevitable Groundhog
right.
Day
Yeah, no,
episodes
I
in
agree with
TV
that. Yeah.
shows where the person gets stuck in a time loop and they relive. And I feel like almost every sort of genre show, whether it's horror, sci-fi, I feel like even, well, I know some other Marvel shows have done that, and I say that with there was a final season episode of Agents of Shield that actually I thought did a phenomenal job with the Groundhog Day
Mm-hmm.
thing. I thought I really enjoyed that one, but I typically, as soon as I see it coming, I'm like, oh god, here we go. I'm gonna have to sit through watching the
Right,
same
right.
scene
Yeah, no, I know.
over
I
and over again.
agree.
And that yeah. So that's I think now that when I went back and thought about it a little more, that's probably the biggest thing,
Mm-hmm.
that was a negative for me. That and yeah, and again, it's continuous. Sort of this episode sort of continued that theme of like, wow, that went really dark,
Mm-hmm.
that idea. And so I think that's the root of why I didn't like it. But there was a lot of things I liked about it.
Right.
So moving on to the final episode in our sort of first half review
Mm-hmm.
here. What did you think about episode 5?
Episode 5, I think, overall was probably one of the more fun ones and a good balance of everything that had come before. Vision's plan and the explanation of
Mm-hmm.
everything. I thought it was all very clever, and then making Vision kind of the villain, or at least the antagonist,
Yeah.
was really cool. Yeah, I think it started out a little bit weak for me, and it was kind of weird seeing zombies that seemed to take on some sort of at least intelligence, if not personality, of the person that they were. But and I
Right.
think in a lot in the same way we were just talking about Malignant. It probably won't be attached to this, but we were talking about how power levels adjusting to fit the needs of the story, and I think
Yeah.
the zombies here had that, because at some points they were able to fire weapons and kind of use tools and stuff, but at other points they were more traditional zombies. But I don't think they really meant for it to be thought too much.
Hmm.
And then once the real plot went
Right.
got going with Vision and trying and zombie Scarlet Witch and everything else, I thought it was really really well done. I also thought that Scott Lang, Paul Rudd had a lot of really funny.
Yeah. Yeah. He did. I really enjoyed this episode. It might be my favorite. I loved that it was very dark in terms of the zombie theme, but yet it was kind of like typical, especially recent zombie movies that tend to have the more comedic element to it. So it
Right.
had all of that. I agreed it was a little jumbled in terms of, okay, how did this happen and where are we? And there was, yes, very some of the Avengers that became zombies were zombies. Like Steve Rogers felt like
Mm-hmm.
just like a straight zombie.
Right.
Um, and yet with Scarlet Witch and some of the others, they had a little bit of their personality and some of their powers.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little bit all over the place, but that's fine. I mean, it was meant to be kind of a campy, just romp,
Mm-hmm.
with the zombie theme in it. But overall, I liked where when they got to that camp, or the
Mm-hmm.
Steve Rogers' old army base there, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
whole Vision twist and how Vision. And I thought it was really nicely done how Vision, started out as like, oh, we got here and look, oh, Vision's got everything under control.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
going
You
to
kind of
save
thought
us.
that was it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was going to be sort of the resolution, is Vision's got everything under control, and then it turned not so great.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Hulk. I wonder if Hulk is still alive at the end of that episode, because he seemed unbiteable. So
Right.
maybe he lasted. Maybe he ends up coming through.
I
But
think we covered most of my thoughts about each episode, but I do want to talk a little bit about the animation, because I don't think we've discussed that.
okay.
Yeah, no, I'm not typically a fan of 3D animation, and I think this can be kind of spotty, especially in terms of like character design. Like sometimes the characters look a little bit wonky, but just in terms of the
Hmm.
animation, how it flows, and some of the lighting and effects on the 3D animation looks really nice. And there are even some shots that I think for like split second look like live action shots, especially from a
Yeah,
distance.
totally. Yep.
There was one, I think, in the episode where Hank Pym kills the Avengers and Loki comes into the United Nations building there. There's like a shot, and it's kind of just a random brief shot, but he is like walking up to the podium, and if you look at it, just the way the lighting and atmosphere is hitting the objects in the foreground and background, it just makes it look almost live action. And then of course the action scenes and special effects kind of, I mean, they're not really, it's all special effects because it's animation, but the kind of bombastic MCU action is still there, especially like in the Doctor Strange episode. And I like that there's a little bit of like an anime kind of aspect to the fight scenes where it's a little bit choppy and a little bit, yeah, like that, just kind of that anime flexibility to everything, which I thought was really cool. For ranking, I would say my least favorite episode, probably just unfortunately due to it being so similar to the original, the first episode. Not to say, I mean, it's my least favorite, not to say that it's bad, but just from everything else we've seen has been, I think, significantly better. Yeah, and the same thing, I think number 4 has to be T'Challa, not because I think it's bad again, but only just because I think the other 3 were such perfect examples of what you can do. 3, my third favorite, right in the middle, definitely Hank Pym murdering the Avengers, episode 3. And Zombies, I think probably second favorite. And then first, obviously, is Doctor Strange.
I think least favorite was Doctor Strange. Second least favorite, similar to you, was episode 1, the Cap twist. Third was probably the Guardians of the Galaxy. Second favorite was the Hank Pym murdering the Avengers, and my favorite was the number 5, the zombie episode.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. And then, yeah, just to pick up on some of the things that you talked about, I was going to ask you, just in terms of the aesthetics of the animation, etc. Some of the shots that seem to be like literally mimicking tracking shots from the films.
Right,
like I remember one specific scene of Star-Lord's spaceship when it's flying into the head of the Celestial there.
Yep.
Do you think some of those were actually taken from the films and animated over?
I would have to
the
guess
ones that were
probably
replicas.
Probably to a certain extent. I mean, obviously you can see some differences, but I don't see why they wouldn't use those as references and just go right on top of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it definitely seemed like that. They were just so close.
Yeah, because they did a great job. I think the biggest difference would be the facial animations, but that is obvious because you have to simplify things and express emotion in certain ways in animation. But yeah, everything else, I would have to imagine that they are not tracing. It's all still original work, but they're just going on top of it and to make sure that it looks as close as possible to the original. Yeah.
Overall, and yeah, it's obviously a massive improvement, because we know that's one area where DC's animation in their TV shows and films has always been superior to Marvel's TV and animated films.
Yeah,
by a mile.
especially animated. Yeah, Marvel has never. Yeah, DC has their whole slate of animated films, and I think there's multiple timelines of animated films, so they have that down. But Marvel has never been able to capitalize on animation as much as DC had. So it's really nice to see them doing this and doing so well, and the rare 3D animation that I am able to really appreciate, because I'm not typically a fan of 3D animation, but there's a lot of great artistry in this one, so I enjoy it.
Well, that wraps up our first episode. We will definitely be back. We hope you will be back as well. We're obviously going to cover the second half of the second 5 episodes of What If, and we'll have a host of other topics coming. We're going to do a lot of Marvel, a lot of horror, a lot of classic sci-fi and horror, get into some paranormal topics as well. So if you've been with us for this entire episode, we thank you, and we hope again that you join us for future Worlds Beyond with Cam and Ron. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.